Hello and welcome to Dice Punks, a tabletop role-playing podcast where we focus on playing full campaigns in less well-known systems. This week in episode 23, the nobles of Mott encounter a non-traditional Familia Caelestis. Hello and welcome. I'm Adam, your friendly neighborhood game master, and joining me are...
Hi, I'm Drew, and I'll be playing Dosktir, Regal of Nothing, and guy who briefly considered surrendering before, well, you'll see.
I'm Robin, and I'll be playing Alyssa, the Duchess of Fury, and I totally forgot to put together an alliteration for this episode.
Hi, I'm Dez, and I will be playing Romnet, prophet at large, and apparently inventor of a sign language.
Excellent. Thank you all for being here and for doing this crazy thing with me week after week after month. Before we get started, though, let's briefly recap any character stat growth and the events of the previous episode, which I believe is going to start off with Romnet's roll for his sessionly experience.
Because I got to keep up somehow. That is a pair of twos.
We'll do it. So you may award yourself that experience point. Is anybody undertaking any character stat growth?
So I will go ahead and splurge on the possibly renamed the Spring Uncoils skill, and also Inward Winding for a combined point cost of 7.
All right.
These sound very Mavian. What do they do?
So the Spring Uncoils essentially enhances a combined dodge slam, so I can actually combine those techniques without the usual 1-die penalty. And if I do succeed, then the slam result does damage as if it was 1 wider. And then Inward Winding is any slam you make is timed as if it's with the +4. If you opt to land on top of the person you slammed, it also does damage as if it's with +4, but leaves you in a down position, which already doesn't really affect me because of Snake and Grouse, because I can fight from down without penalty. And I can make multiple slam attacks in a round, but I can only land on the last person thrown. So they are both very Mavia-esque.
So, in other words, to quote the famous poet, she came in like a wrecking ball.
Yes.
Let the record show is the first time you've gotten me with the words of the poet before we have even started playing, technically.
Well, that one was completely improvised, so
fair.
We'll see if the well, as I was saying before we started session, I may be calling an audible at the end of session, as the poet once said, because this one could be kind of unpredictable, which probably transitions us pretty well into the recap from last time, which is courtesy of Romnet this time.
Really quick, before we do that, and I'm sorry to do this, I am changing my answer, and I am spending 4 points. I am advancing on a martial path.
Yes.
All right.
Listeners may recall that Dosk has been trained in the school of the insouciant monkey. Monkey dodge,
How could we
which
forget?
allows me to... Thank you. It's unforgettable, really. Which allows me to bob, weave, etc. Basically add a dodge to any technique. So the next sort of skill along that path is what is called the drunken monkey. So my bobbing and weaving acts like armor. I essentially get an additional one AR to every location. This works even if I don't roll success. If I'm already wearing armor, this adds to it. The armor effect occurs before any other actions.
Ooh.
Very nice. So yeah, you'll actually want to go through and add 1 armor to each location then.
Okay.
And that will be very useful for a Dosk, I think. This is in addition, of course, to the technique that you were just talking about, Monkey Dodge, that allows you to add a dodge to any action at no penalty, is also in addition to attacks against you being at difficulty 3, which essentially means that your legs cannot be hit in combat.
I'm a slippery sort. A slippery sort of a spastic gentleman.
I'm a snake.
Yeah.
That's all I hear.
I'm a snake.
Rumnet, for one, appreciates this development.
I know. I think Dosk knows that Romnett would appreciate the development, and that's part of why the development is taking
I would
place.
really appreciate it if you do not accrue more finger holes.
Yeah.
They are very interesting scars.
The plan is to avoid damage and retain limbs and stuff. That's, to whatever degree it's possible.
Good.
I will say, if we do end up in large-scale, mostly Mortal Kombat here, cue the song, I am going to do my best to remember these various martial paths and to incorporate some of the combat rules that we maybe have underutilized from Rain so far into the proceedings as best I can, but it will ultimately be up to the players to remind me because I do not have the book spread across my lap due to space concerns currently. So
cool. I reflected that armor. I'll add
my
the
best.
actual skill to the sheet later, and we'll remind should it come up.
Excellent.
Wunderbar. Dankeschön. All right, now I believe we can begin Romnet's recap.
For realsies this time. So, we were continuing in council, as we had been for some time, particularly given the interruptions and manipulations. And a page arrived announcing that the Swift of Therit had returned. So we all went down to the harbor in a carriage. Well, Lissa rode atop the carriage and I assume flirted with the driver. And Apatia ran after us. And we arrived at the harbor, and there were not one but 3 ships. 2 of them had woolen sails, because that's apparently a thing. And odd construction. And it appears that these had returned alongside the Swift. And we were introduced to, I was introduced to the captain, who was apparently as pleasant as she ever wasn't. And so on. She was not pleased to see my compatriots, and I suspect that the feeling was mutual, but we were all a bit distracted when Apatia, horrified, introduced us to the newest member of her noble family, a child named Inbi, who was apparently recently made the Nobilis of Silence, which is a horrifying thing to do as a child, to a child. And Apatia was understandably distraught about this. I introduced myself and started trying to work on a system of signs whereby Inbi would be able to communicate with us and we with her and, circumvent the issue of silence. Also, I imagine it could just be useful generally, but be that all as it may. From there, we split up as Uncle Melly and the rest of them returned to the manor with a poem of Dusk's composition to celebrate the return and rub it into Croesus, I imagine. And we set out for the walls, which are more of a suggestion, a flourish than a defense. And from the walls we could see that indeed there was really a quite extensive army surrounding the city, and very little of it resembling anything human. Lissa made herself more obviously glorious, and there was a great response of howling and yelling and gnashing of teeth, while Dosk used his sight to determine that there were indeed a number of nobles, both throughout the army and in the pavilions that dotted the plain. Apatia and I stayed on the walls as Dusk and Lissa took themselves by secret paths into one of the pavilions, and, well, now I wait.
Thank you very much for that recap. The part, of course, that Romnet was not there for is upon arriving in the pavilion, Dosk and Lissa found themselves looking at what appeared to be a process of assembly, a vaguely body-shaped pile of miscellaneous parts being worked on by an older, sort of gangly fellow, not at all overdressed in what seemed to be a combination of plant and fur matter, who was rummaging around, moving around parts, and when you dropped your glamour, if you will, and showed yourself and announced your peaceful intentions, he looked up from what he was doing and rather politely asked you if you were there to surrender to Palaran, god of wilderness, shadow, verdure, and rot. And that is precisely where we left off. So we will pick up right there with this odd-looking, oddly dressed man with a unfamiliar accent asking you in pretty decent Taraxan if you are there to surrender to his god.
I laugh.
Having had a bunch of real-world time to think about my answer, I say no.
He blinks and cocks his head seriously despite Lissa's laughter and says, "Then why have you come? If not to surrender, what could your peaceable purpose be?"
Well, to ascertain your purpose, for a beginning.
He, without smiling, gives the impression that he is very pleased to have been, sort of addressed in this particular way. And he straightens his shoulders and holds his hands and loose fists kind of in front of himself as though grasping lapels that he is most decidedly not wearing. And he says, "You have the honor of speaking to Tanu, High Priest of Palaran, and one of the leaders of this army. The Shadowed Lands have long been in the shadow of our neighbors, in Turaxis and in Sirtha, and we are no longer standing for it. We will have these lands for our own. We will grow the forests back over your farmland, and we will take all of your decadent riches for ourselves." And he nods as though he is pleased with himself for having remembered the whole speech, and then sort of relaxes his posture a little bit and says, "So, your surrender, then."
Are there any, crafts filled with liquid that look like he might have some sort of drink on hand?
No.
Darn.
Or not.
Darn.
Not in this pavilion, anyway.
We've not introduced ourselves, I don't think. I mean, that would be the right way to do it.
Yeah, well, I was just going to go pour myself something and then offer him a glass and, the ultimate power move, so I'm very sad now. Sorry, but we can't let you do that.
He sort of looks at you with a squint and says, I should think you are the ones who could let me do it. You are nobles, by the look of it. You would have the authority to cede territory on your god's behalf. Who is your god, by the way?
How terribly rude of us. You stand before two nobles of... I look around before saying it. And then I don't say it. I say, the obsidian one? The big they, them, else stairs? But we'll come to that in a moment. The most important thing for the moment is to whom you are speaking. I am Dosktyr, regal of, and this is an important point in regards to our surrender, of nothing.
He blinks, but says nothing.
And my name is Lissa. I'm the Duchess of Fury, which should stand as warning as to what may happen if you do not speak peaceably with us.
He looks thoughtful for a moment, and then looks back up at you and says, Else stairs. What are stairs?
A means of ascending or descending within a structure. That you may be focusing on the least important part of what we... Taraxis is a land that is not under the auspices of a single god. Even if we were inclined to cede territory, as you say, I don't know that we would be able to unilaterally do so. Duolaterally. The two of us couldn't do it.
And I would also like to reinforce the fact that we're not here to cede any territory.
That is an even more important point. Stairs are at least the third most important point.
Tanu looks thoughtful for a moment and looks as though he is about to speak again when a rustle of leaves and strips of bark announces the arrival of someone else into the pavilion. He looks over, as do you, and you see a rather taller woman of fewer years, dressed in only slightly more, and she thins her lips, glancing in your direction, and says, Tanu, who are our unannounced visitors? And Tanu says, These are local nobilis, I believe. Dask, and he gestures at Dask, and Lisa, he gestures at Lissa, and they have not come to surrender. She shakes her head and says, I told you they would not. She turns to you and says, I am Usa, High Priestess of Palaran. If you are not here to surrender, you should leave before we decide not to let you. And then she turns to Tanu, seemingly having forgotten you, and says, When will this one be ready? And Tanu looks down at the pile of parts at his feet and he says, I should think midday tomorrow. And she nods and says, It will be among the first then. And turns to go.
So Usa left, more or less, or she's on her way out.
I mean, yeah, you could stop her if you wanted, but she's going.
I'll turn to Tanu, since don't think I'm going to be able to get through to Usa, but at least he's entertaining us with conversation. And I'll say, so you say that the Shadowed Lands have been neglected, overlooked, compared to some of these other lands. Perhaps we could come to some accord that does not require warfare. Or surrender. I look at him very firmly on that one.
He clearly changes what he was about to say when you add that, and says, Well, I am afraid that it is not up to me. Palaran has decided that war it shall be.
How many surrenders have you accepted so far? You say Sirtha as well. You say other deities of Taraxis. If you were aware, that is, that there are other deities present or omnipresent, as it were, in Taraxis. Has anyone surrendered yet?
He looks a little taken aback by the question. Could I get and you are going to hate me for this, a sense empathy roll.
You know, I very recently had the chance to put some more points into this. So I have nobody to blame but myself and you.
We both did.
To be fair, I did.
You did. You did actually do that.
Yeah,
Textually,
you did.
we weren't together at the time. But, yeah, it's no matches.
What was your high die?
10.
Interesting. Can I get you to roll one die and tell me what you get?
Sure. That time, that was a 9.
Ooh. Tanu briefly looks sort of uncertain and then sort of squares his shoulders and looks you straight in the eye and says, "Our devotion to Palaran has been centuries, but only recently has Palaran graced us with the ability to push beyond our borders to unify the tribes of the Shadowed Lands into the force that you see here. You will have the honor of being the first added to Palaran's dominions. I assure you, Palaran is a benevolent god. You, as nobilis, certainly will not be around to see what becomes of your land, but your people will be treated mercifully if they surrender."
An in-character laugh, I assume. Do I? So we've talked a lot about what is this is an aside, obviously. But I imagine there is a long pregnant silence in which I could consider this in text,
Sure.
or not. But you know, he seems in a hurry yet no hurry. What I was going to ask was, do I know what goes on in the Shadowed Lands, even by rumor or reputation? And I'm totally down to do a lore roll if that's appropriate.
Go ahead and do a lore roll. You know some things off cuff, but the lore roll will determine how detailed your information is.
That's fair. That is knowledge plus lore, which is 7 dice for Dusk.
Correct.
So there's a decent chance that this goes not badly. He said, jinxing it moments before rolling.
Almost certainly.
That is a pair of 10s.
Not at all jinxed. So, coming up in the Tyr family, you had opportunity to hear more stories with more backing them up than the average person about what might be in the Shadowed Lands. Now, I say might be because, generally speaking, if anybody accidentally or intentionally went ashore there, they were never heard from again. But there were stories about people sailing close or seeing what happened to people who put ashore in ship's boats. And it tends to be pretty graphic. If people are still visible on the shoreline, they're torn limb from limb by twisted monstrosities, part animal and chimeric. But there are also stories that people live there and that they live as beasts do. The fact that both Usa and Tanu seem to be able to speak good Taraxan is a little bit strange given these stories. But sailors being sailors, you imagine that it was maybe a little bit exaggerated when you heard these stories. In any case, if you were to have heard a story about the Shadowed Lands going to war, this is not too far off from what you would expect a horde of twisted creatures spilling out from the forest to engulf the, quote-unquote civilized lands to the south. What is interesting, though, is that the stories you heard would certainly have characterized people like Tanu as more than simply savage, bestial. There wouldn't have been room for a relatively well-spoken, seemingly quite well-educated man who's clearly spent a fair bit of time in a priestly order, unknown to Taraxis, even in stories.
Thanks for that. In fact, I thank the voice in my head possibly even under my breath. And if people think I'm strange, it wouldn't be the first time. So is there somewhere where we could sit down?
Mm-mm. No furniture.
Okay.
I mean, you can sit on the ground, I guess.
He's not sitting on the ground. It's this is officially politics. So I say, I must say your offer of a kind of peace already stymies some of what I thought I knew about the Shadowed Lands. So perhaps, I give Lissa a glance as if to say, this is your department. Perhaps this is all some manner of misunderstanding, and perhaps there is yet a way to broker something that involves neither outright war nor unconditional surrender.
We have opened up some trade avenues between distant lands, so what if we were able to do the same with the Shadowed Lands?
Indeed, what you lack, you could have in abundance.
This sounds like an occasion for charm plus graces rolls.
That is
5
dice.
5 dice, I think, on both counts.
Yeah.
5 dice on both counts.
Ooh, 2 4s.
2 4s from Lissa.
2 9s. Actually, hold on. So I have 2 9s or 3 4s. This is the first time
your
this has
3 4s
happened.
would become 3 7s.
That's true.
Since, it's a charm roll.
And I'm sorry, why would that be?
Why is that happening?
Because somebody has struck a sad boy and he has rung like a gong.
That's among my favorite fables.
What does that sound like?
3 7s versus 2 9s. This is a depth versus width decision.
Correct. So width is usually correlated with immediacy, and height is usually correlated with sort of quality or completeness. Thoroughness is a good word for it.
Yeah.
So it's kind of up to you.
I think I'll choose to be thoroughly charming, since I can always let Lissa talk first. So I'll take those 2 9s.
And so, yeah, for the listener at home, this is one of the reasons why I really love the one roll engine is that true to its name, you kind of get all the information you could need. And me as a GM, I get some director's notes from rolls that take place. It's quite good. So with the things that you have just said, you notice as you speak that Tanu looks less sort of thoughtful and more confused. So if you would like to add some kind of coda to your initial remarks, now is your chance.
Being new to matters of war, you may not be aware that in many cases, the most favorable outcome to you, to us, and to our gods is for no one to ever have to raise a weapon in the first place. Less loss, less waste, and perhaps everyone getting what they want.
He pauses for a moment and then opens his mouth, closes it, opens it again, and says, "But what Palaran wants is control over land and worship of people. Can you provide such without it being imposed by force?"
I find that when someone wants control, or when someone says they want control, meaning no disrespect, of course, they're really after something else. What good would controlling the land do? Is it resources? Is it purely the worship? Is it power for its own sake? That's admittedly harder to work with.
This is an unusual roll. I need sense plus knowledge rolls from our 2 nobilis present.
Okay. Ooh. Sense
combining
plus
2
stats.
Combining 2 stats is unusual. That's going to be 6 dice for Dask and 3 for Lissa.
I got 2 1s. Match is a match.
Hey, it's a match. Yeah.
Hey. That is... Sorry, that's a lot of... I'm wrangling my dice. That is a pair of 6s.
I was going to go hashtag humble brag. All right. Dask, you get there first. Lissa, you arrive at this conclusion independently. Tanu looks like he is about to say something kind of reflexively and almost bites down on his tongue to stop himself from doing it. And then very deliberately turns back to his work on this pile of gristle and says, "If you wish to leave, you should do so now. I cannot guarantee your safety any longer. Goodbye."
I have, fact, been to... No, what does he begin to do?
I was going to say, he begins to sort of affix some sort of crooked limb into a ball joint somewhere on what appears to be the torso of the body he is constructing.
There are many gods that receive favors and worship from Taraxans. Introducing Palaran among them would not make much of a difference to us, but control over them we cannot offer.
He affixes the limb with a stomach-turning wet pop and looks up at you, seeming tired, and he says, "It does not seem that you wish to understand, but Palaran does not want to be the option for worship from people. He wants to be worshipped solely by the people here, as he is by the people in the Shadowlands. If you are unwilling to treat this as a starting point of negotiation, I am afraid I cannot help you. It would help our cause for us to strike you down here, but we are being quite charitable in allowing you to return to your dwelling of stones and stink. Be gone." And he turns to rummage up a rib cage.
One final question. If we're taking worship exclusively of your deity as the opening of negotiation, what does this worship entail? I have a master die in haggle. I don't know if we can haggle terms of peace, but...
He says, "Well, no, this is a question I am happy to answer. So, the worship of Palaran is overseen by his priesthood, of which I am a senior member. And we typically offer prayers. We offer labor and military service if we are laity. And from time to time, sacrifices of people and animals is required, though it is uncommon in times of peace, which, I remind you, we could return to if you would simply surrender."
We've dealt with another god that wanted to be the sole recipient of worship. They did some pretty monstrous things to their nobilis, and to the balance of things. Are you not afraid of a similar outcome with your god? Does your god not realize that in seeking to conquer, he stands to lose everything?
He looks at you very seriously, and I'm actually going to roll for him. Give me just 1 second. In the meantime, Lissa, you should roll, and I know that you are not going to like doing it, but I promise you there's not a lot writing on it, sense plus empathy.
Okay. No matches. Highest dice is an 8, if it matters.
All right, that does matter. So, he looks at you very seriously, maintaining eye contact, and says in a voice filled with foreboding that you manage to not, actively shudder from, but you kind of want to. He says, "What exactly do you think is at stake here? What is it that any of these gods want? I think you are woefully underinformed, and that would be a good reason for you to... Well, as the soul shards cannot be removed safely, sacrifice yourselves for the good of your people. Palaran will take better care of them than your negligent god seems to be doing. Now, I have been polite. The next time I must ask for you to leave, it will be with a shout to my attendants They are not very pleased to see such as yourselves, I promise you.
Well, I won't pretend that I'm happy with this outcome, but thank you for receiving us peaceably and for showing us your work there. I gesture at the flesh assemblage. I then make us invisible.
All right. As you fade back out of awareness, he hefts what looks for all the world like an ankylosaurus tail. Thagomizer, yes.
A thagomizer.
Indeed. He hefts a thagomizer and affixes it to the end of the limb he had attached to the body earlier. Dusk, you are fascinated by this, but Lissa, your craftsman's instincts kick in, and you suddenly realize what they've been building in these pavilions. Siege engines.
So I've made us in-bubbled, but I have not zooped us, and I lean to Lissa and say, I think we may be at an impasse here, but if you've got a better instinct, I'm more than willing to hear it.
I think we might be at an impasse too, but there's stuff that he seems unable to tell us.
And if he's unable, who would be able?
Unfortunately, I don't know.
We could pursue Usa, but we might meet those less happy to see us.
She seemed even less willing to entertain us.
True. Maybe when he says that we're fortunate to be able to simply walk out of here without conflict, it's not entirely wrong.
I think they're being quite honest, in fact. And I don't think they realize what's at stake.
I don't think it's ever occurred to them that they could lose. Or that they have any option other than to fight to the last. Anyway.
They're building siege engines in here.
What? Oh.
Look closely.
Do I scrutinize? Do I look? Because I certainly can take Lissa's word for it.
Well, I think that taking Lissa's word for it, if you look at what is coming together in front of Tanu, it becomes clear how it could be leveled, if not necessarily against the stone walls directly, then against some of the gates with great effect.
Now, remind me, there are some Octoritas within some of the tents, the pavilions, but the
Correct.
army
Fact,
is all appearing mortal, no Octoritas.
The army is mostly appearing mortal. There are scattered a couple dozen of weak Octoritas among the army, and in each tent there is a somewhat stronger Octoritas, presumably belonging either to Tanu or to his construct, though you haven't looked with the sight since you arrived. Inside the pavilion, that is.
Well, that's a hint. We should look with the sight before we leave.
That's what we call an affordance for the month between last session and this one.
Thank you.
It's definitely the sort of hint that suggests.
And we were much needed. It was much needed because I think we had just arrived in the tent last time, and then...
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. So looking with the sight, you actually see that both Tanu and his construct have Octoritas. The construct has a weak Octoritas, and Tanu's is slightly stronger. Lissa, you would estimate that Tanu is about on par in terms of spirit with you. But here's the thing. This close, looking at his Octoritas, he's definitely not a nobilis. Certainly the creatures aren't.
Mm-hmm. So it seems like they're able to multiply their Octoritas somehow. And the real nobilis is elsewhere.
Fascinating and distressing. Oddly encouraging that perhaps we weren't détenting, as it were, with anyone with actual power. So perhaps there is yet someone who we could charm, convince. We may be speaking to a good soldier and nothing more.
can we zoop outside of the tent to give the
Tanu, I'd like to speak
yeah,
to
to
I
you.
do
give
need
the
to- yeah,
appearance
exactly.
as to leaving.
Yeah, and we're presumably, we're I don't know whether he's aware of our presence at all. Has he given any sign that he is while we've been standing here?
He has been working studiously, but in much the same way as he was when he was trying to signal you to leave. So whether or not he is aware that you have not actually left is kind of uncertain.
The illusion could be complete, or we could be whispering behind a potted plant and he could totally know it. Okay,
Mhm.
fair enough. I think we zoop on out.
In that case, we are going to jump back in time and in space a little bit to the wall where we left Romnet with Apatia. The sensation of having the Nobilius disappear and then zoop away from you is interesting because you can kind of feel the rush of air filling the space where they were. And there's just kind of a beat as you and Apatia look out over this sunset to twilight lit camp.
I don't know that I've ever yet been
You have
alone
not,
with
or at
Acacia.
least not for more than a couple seconds. And it is only after a couple of those seconds that she kind of looks at you and she says, seemingly guilelessly, "He's very likable, isn't he?"
I will just sort of turn and look at her.
She blinks and says, "Oh, I've practiced poor social graces, haven't I? I'm sorry. I just mean, I can tell how much you care about him. And, well, when I was young, Mother Nix allowed me to care for a little while for a rabbit that one of the acolytes had brought in. Eventually we had to let it go, and I hope it's all right, but he reminds me of the rabbit."
I will nod slowly. I would hope that neither he nor I are the rabbit
Well,
in this comparison.
Not a precise comparison, certainly, but you are much less rabbit-like. I can see why he likes you, too. She shrugs a little bit and says, "I hope you don't think that I'm troublesome. I don't want to be, but I And she sighs, and a lot of the pep goes out of her voice. "It is distressing to finally have a sister under such appalling circumstances. I was alone for quite some time. That's part of the reason I get so excited to have friends." And she kind of looks out over the camp and says, "I like Dusk, but mainly I've never had anything like his ability before. I don't know how much he's told you, but I feel everything all the time with all my senses. I that's what Mother Nix has done for me. It took me a while to realize that not everybody operates that way, but
That sounds like torment.
well, it was all I knew until I stood close to Dusk. His nothing is a relief. So I kind of need him,
Yeah, I could imagine that.
but I don't want my need to, be a problem." And she is, by this point, blushing, not unlike the sunset.
Does your need of him, and I will offer a tone that strongly suggests that I do not think it to be the case, extend to matters romantic.
She cocks her head, seemingly uncomprehending for a moment, and says, "Oh, no? No.
Okay.
I don't think, no."
Then I don't anticipate this will be a
She kind
problem.
of chuckles. She says, "Well, that's a relief. And besides," she kind of looks conspiratorially left to right and then goes, You're the more fetching anyway. The eyes and hair. And then she nods vigorously.
They are a recent change.
Oh, well, I think they were a good style choice. You should keep them.
I don't know that I could do otherwise.
She looks a little crestfallen, and then she goes, "Oh, I'm sorry. I was."
No, not a problem. I recently, I suppose you could say, devoted myself to the school of magic that I practice.
Oh.
And this
Oh,
was
did
part
something
of the
go wrong?
result. No, this... How familiar are you with magic generally? Like, mortal magic, that is.
She shakes her head. She says, "The only magic I know is miracles. But honestly, I can see why this would be." And she, sort of looks up at your hair and then into your eyes again and says, "It's fetching." And then she sort of looks away for a second and says, "I mean, not that, but anyway, I would love to see some magic sometime. Do you think they're okay?" And looks back out at the camp.
I dearly hope so.
She nods. She says, "Me too. I haven't really had friends before. Just worshippers. And now I guess I have a sister." Hooray.
Would you like me to fill you in on the signs that we were working out?
She sort of turns to you while she draws a breath and she says, "Oh, I would like that, yes. That would be wonderful and would probably help to pass the time a little." And she chuckles kind of nervously.
Yeah, I will do that, and also, in the course of it, explain a bit about how, magic works and changes one upon devotion to a particular school and other mechanical things.
Certainly. She's an extremely apt pupil, and I guess you wouldn't have any way of knowing if she's using aspect miracles to, accelerate her learning or not, but she picks up on sort of the underlying logic of your sign system very quickly. And by the time, you are sort of running out of aspects of this very sort of inchoate, sort of early form of the thing to teach her, you feel pretty confident that the two of you could have, conversations with the level of detail and resolution that, say, Semaphore allows, pretty reliably, just through signs and signals, done with gesture. So you spend a little time interacting and sort of, dare I say, bonding with Apatia a bit. Our Nobilis here, when you are zooping, are you zooping back up to the walls, or do you have another destination in mind?
I think the goal initially was to get outside of the tent.
Okay, well, that is easily done.
And try to, just give the...
I mean, you could just walk
Well,
that.
we wanted to give the impression that we were leaving. And we zooped in, so we might as well zoop out.
And zooping is free for Dusk, so...
It is. And we didn't want to be seen exiting because that wouldn't have raised questions about who was negligent in letting us get in the first place, which best not to open that particular can of worms. So I guess we've zooped outside of the tent and we're in the midst of the war camp, still insensible to mortal sensibilities.
You are, although you are standing almost astride a creature that looks like a mid-sized doe with a wolf's head that is sort of dozing lightly, not too far from other sort of combinatorial creatures that make up the camp. There is not a lot of empty space within the camp. The only place there's any really cleared out areas seem to be around the very scattered and infrequent campfires that are used by the more human of the inhabitants.
I'm going to turn my sight towards because it's been a moment.
Mhm.
I assume all of these creatures came ashore aboard boats.
They did not.
Okay. Any indication as to where they came from, whence they came?
Well, looking around, the Shadowed Lands start on the other side of a river that you can just barely see the glimmer of from Therit's wall, so you know where it is from ground level. And it would seem that they either forded, swam, or rafted over that river to get here. But no permanent, ships are in evidence. Certainly not here. They came overland from the riverbank.
So, turning my sight to across the river,
Mhm.
do I see anything miraculous in the Shadowlands? Or sense, even if it's at a distance?
That is a good question, and it brings up the matter of the range of the sight. So, let me make a call here. In the area that is perceptible to your mortal vision, nothing that you had not seen from the walls with the sight comes up. If you wish, you can use an aspect miracle to see further and with more resolution than you otherwise would have been able to do. And that would extend your ability to analyze with the sight. But I think that is going to take no fewer than 2 aspect miracle points. Since level 1 is high level human, and humans can't generally see over the horizon.
I still have my bonus. Is it worth it? I'm
I figured you were asking Dosk and not me.
Yeah.
No, I think that's how I took it. That's a good question.
Dez is nodding.
Yeah, I think it's worth it.
Okay.
We're so in the dark right now.
Literally.
And I'll use. You said it was just 1 aspect miracle point.
2.
I said it was going to be a
be
minimum of 2.
Minimum of 2.
Yeah. Depending on how far you wanted to see. If you want to see, to the river versus into the Shadowed Lands.
Yeah. If I wanted to see into the Shadowed Lands, would that be many more? Would that be 3, 4?
I'm kind of just feeling it out a little bit here because the descriptions are, technically it'd be a level 7 aspect miracle for impossible for anyone for a local effect, and level 8 for impossible for anyone for a non-local effect. But simply extending the sight doesn't seem like it should cost you a deep miracle.
Like the same as lifting a hill or mountain.
Right. So I was going something more along the lines of, world record performance for seeing to the river, maybe, 3 for seeing into the Shadowed Lands, and 4 for being able to apply the sight to the majority of the Shadowed Lands. Let's call it that.
My thought is, if we're going to do this, let's do it. And I think I'm going to spend the 4.
All right. That will still leave you with 2, so you'll have some emergency get out of maiming free cards.
Yeah, if any listeners are screaming at me right now, I wouldn't tap myself to do this, dear listener.
Well,
but
something I had not thought of before that might also be relevant is that Dosk's spirit is 1 higher than Lyssa's. So your defense against aspect miracle attacks is a little bit more robust.
Is based
to be crude about it, I could take a little more of a punch, yeah.
Indeed.
Okay. Yes, I do that. I fix my gaze, and a gaze that goes beyond gazing. I'm seeing not just with my eyes, of course, but I concentrate intently on the Shadowed Lands and try to see what I can learn about what nobility, what nobles lie there, and in number, in power, whatever I can see.
Your mortal mind is not up to this task. But fortunately, you have just used a reasonably substantial aspect miracle. And so not only is your sight enhanced, but so too are your mental faculties. And it is, frankly, for Dosk especially, a euphoric feeling to just know that at that moment you are mightier mentally than any mortal that has ever lived. And your thoughts and your senses sort of whirl along at quite literally superhuman speeds as you interpret the information coming to you, both from an impossible, almost sort of like tesseracting visual sense and the spiritual survey that you do. What you find is this. The Shadowed Lands currently, well, it would be wrong to say they are deserted, but they are certainly depopulated. It seems like a fairly tremendous number of its denizens are currently here. And you detect nothing in the way of Octoritases, or in the way of sort of significant miraculous residue in the Shadowlands themselves. It seems like everything is basically committed here. On top of that, the whole of the Shadowlands, though, does seem to be subject to kind of an ongoing miraculous effect. There is an extra natural effect that the longer you look at it, the more it seems like it's been there for, you might be comfortable saying, eons. You feel as your miracle starts to fade that perhaps the whole region has in some way been enchanceled, and that this maybe has diluted the effect somewhat, where Fermata is a single city that has been completely removed from reality, and Kilata is a single city that has sort of been made into a little pocket attached to reality. That the Shadowed Lands, vast region that it is, have sort of just become a bit of a warping of reality rather than anything separated from it. You almost feel that given enough time and miraculous energy, you could gaze upon Palaran by looking at the Shadowed Lands. But you also come away from this relatively certain that Palaran does not have any nobilis.
I convey this in less eloquently than the power, the presiding god of this reality.
The voice in your head.
Yeah, exactly. Not just because I'm Dosk, but that if I say that if we searched forever for a nobilis from the Shadowed Lands, I don't think we'd find one. It seems to work different. Less a pocket than a shimmer, the place itself. And if we're looking to negotiate with someone like us, but from there, we may be out of luck.
Well, we just learned what Palaran wants through surrender.
And on top of the rest, on top of subjugation and all of that, our extinction, perhaps.
Perhaps. I was thinking more or less he wanted to steal our shards, but you might be onto something.
It seems that I don't know. It's almost as if shards are wealth, then the wealth has been redistributed.
We should go back to the wall.
I agree. I joop.
And it is so.
I shoot, you shoot, we shoot.
He, she, or it, he, she, they, or it joops. Yes.
I was going to say, I put my hand up on your shard.
Yeah.
That is exactly what I was going for, Adam.
I was trying
Thank
to come
you.
up with something that would not sound Lissa-esque.
Yeah.
Like an innuendo.
But why? Where's the fun in
Euphemism.
that?
So, you Jupe, are you trying to land back at the relative point of your departure?
Yes, I think so.
In that case, Dusk and Lissa arrive about 8 feet to the right of Apatia, who is just to Bromnet's right on the wall as you are wrapping up your sign language lesson. There is a small kind of sound, and there's
And the air redistributes accordingly.
and there stand Lissa and Dusk, looking perhaps a little bit morose, and Apatia visibly relaxes as soon as she sort of perceives that they have arrived back.
But
Well, the good news is we're back in one piece. One piece per, that is.
But we don't have much good news beyond that. They expected us to give our surrender, and despite our best efforts to extend an olive branch, they thought the best kindness they could offer us was to leave before they didn't let us. They're building siege engines, and I look at Dosk to deliver the bit about Nobilis.
Well, we'd hoped to negotiate with a noble, and it seems they don't have any. Which is not to say that there's no divine presence, just that it's something made. I mean, we were made, I suppose, in a manner of speaking, but it's a different process, and there's none of worse.
So what I'm hearing, perhaps, is that those you met with are more like me than like you.
Almost exactly unlike you in every way that I care about, but in terms of their relationship to their deity, yes, quite a bit more like you than like me.
But with an atrocities and the seeming ability to imbue the creatures they're kind of putting together, like crafting, but more fleshy.
They can make
Creatures they're putting together.
You heard me properly.
You didn't mention that. I understand this, but you hadn't mentioned that. You had said siege engines. Are these
yes,
the siege
the creatures
The
are the
very
siege
same.
engines.
Shit.
They've got flail arms.
Apatia looks sort of concerned. Her brow is knit together, and she's kind of in thought, and she says, "No, Nobilis, but atrocities. I think this might be somewhat similar to the ancestor spirit creatures that we encountered. Perhaps they are simply getting some kind of, they're being imbued, but not with a soul shard. They're not in charge of an aspect of reality. They're deputized, even maybe temporarily, requiring some kind of maintenance. Oh, I don't know. It's not something that Mother Nyx ever did, but
they're not a standing army. They've rounded up a posse.
She looks a little confused and says, perhaps
levies.
The creatures themselves certainly are under control, but those with authorities, they're, channeling the power of their god, but it's not part of their nature. That could be useful, right?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about it that way.
Is there any way, given that there is no intermediate rank between priesthood and divinity that the two of you occupy, the three of you occupy, to launch an attack at the god itself?
Apatia literally sort of like her mouth does like a little O, and she like covers. Oh.
My eyes go a little wide and a little red with surprise and hope. And if, but only if, you had it suggested to you, you might think I look like a rabbit.
This little nose does a little twitchy thing too.
Just like I dream of Genie.
And then the mountains crumble because that was how the power gets activated. Yeah.
Is it even possible to kill a god?
Apatia just remains alarmed looking.
It stands to reason.
Another factor I did not bring up was the fact that Palaran wants to be recognized as the only deity, and I give a kind of meaningful look to Apatia as I say this, and turn all of this land and its residents into an extension of the Shadowed Lands.
They would accept nothing but surrender because their goals are absolute control. We, being capable of a more nuanced approach, might consider that we don't necessarily need to kill a god, just subdue one.
Did you happen to catch what Palaran oversees?
Wilderness, decay.
Yeah. Did you?
Mm-hmm.
Wilderness, shadow, verdure, and rot was the list that you got.
You can cut me out saying that. You cut out me saying that word super wrong. I don't know where I went.
Oh, I don't know how to say it right.
I thought you were intentionally saying it wrong as Dosk.
You know what? Keep it and say Dosk said it. I'm cool with that. I just genuinely.
We missed the shadow, but we were a 3 out of 4.
Right. Now that we've made a whole conversation about it, I'm going to look up the pronunciation of verdure because...
It's verdure.
All right, fair enough. Maybe you were just saying it in French.
I know tiny amounts of too many languages, and it messes me up frequently. So,
and that 30 Rock joke about the verdure, I would only hear verdure, and I was so confused.
The dictionary.com is the stress on the first syllable VUR and the second syllable unstressed JER. So make of that what you will.
It's very French.
Yeah.
I invite the listener to announce anyone they've ever heard pronounce that wrong and believe that Dusk says it that way.
Yeah, I think the British dictionary has it, if my IPA is on point, as verdure.
Mm-hmm. We're not going to say it that way.
That's the only time you'll ever get me.
I pronounce all 6 of the X's and okay,
and both H's.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So we answer.
Out of character, though. Did y'all tell me about the right of the last trump and how that works?
I can't think when we would have.
Or not the last trump.
No, because Lissa is not even aware that she's been nettled still.
I don't think either of us.
None of us. Well, the only one that knows is Apatia still.
Apatia is probably the only one that has that information.
Okay.
And it's unclear how much she truly knows about it.
Have we established whether Ramnet, because I think because it's, we didn't know how to bring it up, it never came up. Have we established whether Ramnet would know what that is on any level?
I think almost that this is a declaration of no.
Yeah, almost certainly not.
Okay.
This is just Ramnet being terrible and creative, and how do you?
Sure, right.
And, please somebody intervene so I don't go full hogfather here.
Little known fact, Ramnet's last name is actually Tea Time. This is not true. This is not true.
Not canon. Please do not add that to any sort of wiki.
Does Ramnet have a last name? I'm not sure.
He does not appear to.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's an open question. It might be Tea Time. So during all of this, Apatia is looking kind of troubled and thoughtful, but seems to be spinning her wheels.
I will invite her thoughts.
She sort of shakes her head. She goes, I really don't know how helpful I can be. I mean, Mother Nyx was the only goddess in Diamacor, but there wasn't any competition. I suppose it's possible that there used to be, but there's certainly no record of that time. I wonder, though, whether or not it's possible to, and she murmurs softly, kill a god. It might certainly be possible to drive one out. I just don't know how. It seems like, from what you're saying, though, what this Palaran wants is to acquire worshippers. So maybe that's the key.
We offered to introduce a new religion to Ataraxis, and they kind of shot us down. But
she shakes her head a little bit and says, "No. What if we targeted the worshippers? What would happen to the god if they were without worship?" She shrugs and she goes, I genuinely don't know. Presumably, since they're responsible for aspects of reality, they would endure, but maybe their ability to affect mortals would be diminished. I can't imagine that Nyx would want to make common cause with Palaran if Palaran is attempting to become hegemon.
What if instead of going after the worshippers, we went after the concepts?
Hypatia immediately goes even paler and looks at the ground and says nothing.
What is the opposite of rot? What is the opposite of verdure?
aren't they kind of the opposite of each other?
How do you attack a set of concepts that contain each other's negations?
That are part of the same cycle.
Cities are neither rotting nor green.
And that would probably explain why Palaran had such a objection to our farmland, our developments. And even the one we spoke with hated the city.
The very idea of a building standing permanently seemed distasteful.
So, what is the greatest display of architecture and civilization? Surely this might be something that would interest Creusus.
Hypatia sort of is looking side to side, and she says, I always learned that it was Kilada. Sorry, the city in Diamacor. I always learned that it was the apex of artifice, I believe is how it would translate into Taraxan. Yes, it was carved from a box canyon. In fact, some substantial meters of the back of the canyon were quarried and hauled out to make the temple. It seems like the human alteration, permanent alteration of the natural, would be the antithesis of the wilderness. She gives sort of a big, sharp-toothed smile in Dosk's direction and says, these language and translation miracles are certainly worth the power that I dump into them. I'm enjoying the more advanced vocabulary of Taraxan quite a lot, and I thank you for being my guide. But I don't know, are we proposing to build a city in the Shadowlands? That seems like perhaps a more long-term solution than is called for currently.
The Shadowlands does seem to constitute the chancel for Palaran.
And it would be very dangerous to go there.
Most of the forces are here.
I can't say for certain that it stands unguarded, but yes, it seems to have emptied itself out to a considerable degree for this project.
Hypatia nods.
So, if a city were to appear, if the distance between a city and the Shadowed Lands were reduced to nothing,
Even to those who had
how
not,
might that affect
even to
things?
those who had not had it suggested, Dusk might look like a rabbit in that moment.
For her part, when Ramnet says this, Hypatia's head comes up slowly, and then after a very brief pause at the exact same pace, swivels toward Dusk. Her expression remains fairly blank.
What is the closest? How close is Kilata to... If Kilata is the greatest, or at least... Well, I won't deny that it's the greatest. It's really a lovely place, Ramnet, we need to go at some point when this is all over. The point is, if it is the greatest, or at the very least the most offensive to the sensibilities of the deity upon which we launch an attack, how much distance are we talking about reducing?
Already, Hypatia is shaking her head. She says, Mother Nyx would not suffer her chancel to be relocated. Regardless of your power...
What if a city already permanently in shadow?
You are thrice a genius.
We're gonna move Fermata into the Shadowed Lands.
I think we could probably count on our god giving a less explicit no.
Sanction?
Well, they seem to think that this sort of thing is what all gods want.
It's true. It's true. We've been sent to war for questionable reasons. But I think at least we serve a god who knows that there are other things besides absolute victory and absolute surrender. Right? I turn to Ramnet when I say that.
There are many things in the darkness.
Well said.
Having just said that, Ramnet, I will need you to roll a lore for me.
Knowledge plus?
Of course. 6 dice.
That is 3 sevens.
Quite good. Lucky 7s. Sort of reflexively seeking a good answer to this as you sort of respond with your best deduction, you come to the conclusion that you may not know what Mott's ultimate goals are, but you can be fairly sure that they would relish the opportunity to catch their fellow gods unawares in such a way. It seems very in keeping with Mott's general character and portfolio of parts of reality.
It does seem like a maneuver that would appeal to Mott. The question is how to get the power to do the thing. Which is a question beyond my standing.
There may be one additional question, which is, of course, if we fail, do we risk a city? The projectile we launch at this adversary contains people, a great many of them.
I mean, if we fail, we risk a number of cities, not least, and I will just spread my arms at the city on whose walls we're standing discussing this.
You're not wrong. You're not the least bit wrong.
So, the strategy then is perhaps to put a city, perhaps Fermata, in the Shadowed Lands.
And if we put a city in the Shadowed Lands, that still leaves the matter of the army at this city's doorstep.
It does.
Mm-hmm.
Are we imagining
Which
that if we pull this off, the army that we will, you are quite correct, still have to deal with will be quite mortal in its qualities?
But still opposed to, it would still pose a risk to our city.
still pose a risk generally, but it does seem like it might lose some of its heft if it were no longer as divinely tied. And keep in mind that I don't actually know if this is how any of this works.
If you don't, then we certainly don't.
You had mentioned, at one point before you went, herring off to parts distinctly nautically elsewhere, that Fury was under attack. So what I was essentially proposing was a grander and more thorough version of that.
Apatia stands bolt upright and gets kind of a cat-like grin and says, "Do we know if Cirtha has cities?" She looks back and forth between the three of you and goes, "I mean, potentially two birds with one stone, right?"
I believe they have cities.
Two birds. I mean, they're the only ones we've. I mean, if the big they has a score to settle with anyone, I suppose it's the ones who issued a rather successful threat and engaged in a rather successful attack on them. Two birds?
One terrible, terrible stone.
I do not like that we are gambling with lives, but I can't think of a better, and I can't believe I'm saying this, I can't think of a better solution, because I don't want to risk anyone in Fermata, and I don't want to risk anyone in this city.
Let's see. Without telling you outright what you're rolling, could I get, let's see, 2 dice from Dosk and 3 from Lissa?
Okay.
Oof. Is there any way I can assist in this?
Not to be too cryptic, but you already have.
2 4s, 2 4s. Like
No
my lucky
matches
number
here.
today.
Yeah, really. No matches here, though. The higher die is a 7, if that matters.
So 2 4s from Lissa.
Mm-hmm.
So Apatia has raised the possibility of two birds with one stone, although Lissa's objections, I think, are probably pretty reasonable. And Lissa, it kind of seems to you like Apatia is really hard to read, but you've been around her a little while now. Something about her demeanor in this particular case seems kind of brittle.
Her demeanor seems brittle in the case like that. It's not quite real.
Well, like I said, she's hard to read, but it seems like she's not maybe 100% at ease with this suggestion.
Is there something you want to add, Apatia?
She blinks twice and says, "Oh, I mean, no, no.
Is there something you don't want to add?
We're a little, short on allies. I mean, I am certainly in your corner, but it isn't as though Nyx and Mott get along famously well. They seem to mostly ignore each other. And, both Palaran and whatever was in the ocean you were telling me about don't seem exactly friendly, and, well, the Searthans, whatever was going on with them, one of their number seemed to directly attack Mott, so just a thought. By the time she finishes saying that, she's sort of like looking down at her feet.
If it turns out we and the Searthans have a common enemy, and if they have a city they'd particularly like to get rid of, then perhaps this could all work out. I grant you that's unlikely.
It would seem like a pretty clear act of war against Cirtha, not just the god, but its people.
She nods a little and says, "Yes, no, you are right about that. I guess it comes down to, do we think that we're already at war with Cirtha, or that there might still be room there?" She shrugs a shoulder and says, "I suppose it's
Here's
easy."
another
because
suggestion. Oh, sorry.
She says, "I suppose it's easy. I like Kilata, I like Fermata. I've not been to Cirtha, so..." She kind of shrugs the other shoulder independently and falls silent.
Well, here's another thing. If we're trying to create the opposite of shadow, the opposite of decay, inverted growth, a cycle, an opposite could be simply nothing.
Stillness. The lack thereof. Are we suggesting throwing me?
No.
Or a city filled with people that have nothing to do with this quarrel between egotistical deities.
Oh. Something vacuous. A city of no one. That does seem better. Neither life nor death. I mean, it seems to me that if we throw a city full of people at the situation and they die, then, if anything, we're empowering decay.
Mm-hmm.
So, then, how do we produce and project an empty city? A city of nothing.
In my head, and I doubt that this is actually the correct answer that Lissa was thinking of, but in my head, when Lissa suggested this, she was imagining sending Laurentine where her family lives.
Oh, gosh.
Just how vacuous are we talking about here?
Oh, no. She does know of an empty city. It's not a full city.
A town.
Would a town suffice?
Apatia gives an elaborate shrug.
I think we're building these rules as we go. You know of a town that is unpeopled?
After a fashion, yes.
I look around to see if anyone else interpreted that more successfully than I did.
In character as out of character, I am raising an eyebrow.
Apatia is blinking owlishly at Lissa.
There is a city, or a town, that to my knowledge has no residents in it anymore.
Well, that sounds promising. It's not that I don't trust you, you know I do, but why after a fashion? As opposed to simply yes? In regards to its emptiness, I mean.
I wasn't present for its emptying.
I nod slowly. I don't think we have a better idea than this.
I don't think so either.
Where is this town?
Just outside the desolation.
I return to doing math in my head about how much space I need to negate.
The answer is a lot.
Is it more or less than Surthan cities, though? It should be less.
Roughly equivalent, depending on where the Surthan cities are.
Which we don't know.
Yeah. Well, and Dusk has more grounds for making that estimation than Lissa does, but yeah, the Shadowed Lands being between Cirtha and Taraxis, and the Desolation being pretty far into the Taraxis interior, probably the town you're thinking of would be sort of like something in the heartland of Cirtha being moved into the middle of the Shadowed Lands. But it is also probably a smaller settlement than a whole city, which, who knows how that affects things.
Out of character, when we've pulled this trick off before, it's required empty space between the 2 points. Hasn't it? We've sort of implied that we're compressing away everything in between.
Yeah, there is definitely sort of an interruption or a tesseract effect. So who knows exactly what would happen to the things in between in the meantime?
I mean, if you draw a line with 2 circles on the end, you can open that up into a nothing.
And I would point out here that we are almost certainly talking about, for Dosk, moving any significant size of space over this distance, a full-on level 9 miracle of domain. Major changes are going to be the only thing that cover this. Normally, This would be covered under a major creation of nothing, but there is just enough alteration involved here that it would definitely be bumped up those extra 2 levels.
So 4 domain points, leaving 3. I don't know what all is on your sheet.
Yeah. 4 domain points, meaning I would have 3 for whatever is going to happen next.
Dusk is the person to do this if somebody needs to do it. But I did want to make sure that we understood that it would be a pretty big outlay of resources. And frankly, it's a great thing that you sort of spent the points to scry the Shadowed Lands, because you can be relatively sure that there will be no opposing Octoritas on the destination side of whatever you decide to move. Because if you didn't know that, you would also have to count in, like, how much do you want for penetration? So those aspect points are paying off if you decide to pursue this plan.
Right. In for a divine dime, in for a divine dollar.
As
it were.
We ended up going the city route with it, but this might be too much table talk. Lissa is more envisioning just wiping it clean. Like a major destruction.
Simply replacing it with, while it's undefended, taking the something that troubles us and making it. I see. I don't know why that gives me more pause than throwing an empty town into what may as well be a void, but there's something about, I guess it had never occurred to me that I could do that. It's a good idea.
I think this situation will have us doing things that we never thought we could.
Well, I guess, sorry to take us back to table talk, but what would it cost to wipe out the Shadowed Lands?
Why do you phrase it that way? It sounds so much worse.
So if you are talking about using a domain miracle of nothing to just unmake them?
Poof. Yeah. Where there were the Shadowlands, now there aren't, is I think what's on the table here.
Okay, well, that is an interesting question.
I do love the divine math that is ongoing in this session.
So the question here becomes, what do you want to be there when you are done? If you are okay with there being a hole in the world akin to the nothing from the Neverending Story where the Shadowlands used to be, it's a cheaper miracle.
You get what you pay for. I see.
If you wish to fold it out of existence and just snip it away from the world to float free through whatever the cosmos is when there's nothing there, then that's a more expensive one.
Snip it out so that, the bay, I don't have the map in front of me. There's like a bay right before we hit the Shadowlands. That would basically just be right next to whatever is just north of the Shadowlands now. We'd be snipping them.
How about
Cirtha?
How about
You would
Cirtha?
make
Yeah, it would be
Taraxis
Cirtha.
and
You're right.
Cirtha neighbors in that case. Yeah,
That's exactly right, huh?
How about just turning it into a wasteland that can neither decay nor grow nor contain wilderness? Just dead dirt.
Just empty crystal and waste.
that seems actually not especially
Nothing?
likely to happen with Dosk's portfolio here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Darn. Oh gosh. Our
In
options.
fact, that sounds much more like something that one of Cirtha's nobles could do.
Just scorched earth situation.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I
Well,
need to go into
as
my
long as
notes.
As long as we're talking about the divine math, what would the snip and stitch technique run us?
Well, so in this case, it's interesting because putting something into the Shadowlands involves changing geography. Taking the Shadowlands out of reality does actually involve opposing the will of an imperator. So as far as you can tell, what this would involve is the major change to basically snip along the dotted line with nothing. And the miracle points that you would want to use to try to overcome Palaran's Atrocities. So we're talking word of command level stuff here. This would be I think a flat rate of 8 miracle points, which for our listeners at home is as much as a miracle can cost, and a word of command also costs you a grievous wound.
So it could be done, but I wouldn't be at my most useful for whatever is going to happen next.
No, you would not.
Just as long as
That
we're
said-
talking about it, define grievous wound real quick.
Right, so in the Nobilis system, as opposed to the mortal damage system that we have under the one roll engine spot on the character sheet, these are, you can have, I believe, minor, major, and grievous wounds that take different intervals and efforts to heal. They can be affected by aspect miracles, but grievous wounds are also wounds of spirit. And so basically, we would be putting Dosk into something of a hyperbolic time chamber in the heart of Fermata. You wouldn't be unconscious necessarily the whole time, but if you didn't want to risk death, you would have to not emerge from the well chamber for at least a while.
So as we're discussing this in character, would it be fair to say that although I don't have this term, or, I don't have this terminology, something in me knows that if I were to do the thing Lissa is suggesting, it would cost me, and it would be, I can feel the weight of it on some level.
Sort of like if you think about picking something up and you have a decent idea of how much it weighs, you can kind
Sure.
of predict what it's going to do to your muscles. In this case, your muscle that applies is the shard of Mot's soul that rests within you.
Sure.
Is there a way, do you think, that we can petition them for some additional oomph on this matter.
Our visitors?
I think he meant
Right.
Mott.
That's a good thought. I had half the notion of marching back to Fermata briefly, lest we miss the siege, to speak to Ia. As this is a threat directly to Cirtha and Mott, I don't see why they couldn't put aside their pride and whatever other conflicts are going on unseen to at least take care of this.
It's worth checking, I think. Especially if we were to remove the Shadowed Lands and replace it with something less hospitable if we do want to keep the distance between us and Cirtha.
I get the impression Cirtha might prefer that as well.
To Fermata,
the final piece, time being what it is when we go there. Perhaps I should leave word with those who might be besieged?
We should. And perhaps we should leave some... I'm not sure if there's a way to contact Fermata, come to think of it, so there's not a way to, send smoke signals interdimensionally. But if there was a way for us to be messaged, as a aside, where is my sister again?
Loranton?
How far away is she?
Oh boy. So Loranton is in sort of the heart of the Vales, and Therit is sort of in the northwesterly most reaches of Taraxis. So I'm going to say about half a Taraxis away.
Okay. She won't do. I think I updated my spirit recently. So I have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
We can set up an acre in the city. Namely, I could. And you have family here. I don't know why we're trying to make this in duplicate. You, never mind.
Oh, wait, yeah, I could. That's true. I can. Yeah, no, I can. This. I can totally jump back into Uncle Melly. He just, his answer might be, it's been 2 months and the city is a smoking crater. I suppose I'm being paranoid. I just worry about leaving this reality when, well, look, I don't even know how they feel about me, but I care about them, and they're in danger because they're not going to run away. They're going to fight whether they can win or not, I think. No, it's worse than that. They'll think they can win even if they can't. They don't really understand what they're up against, and they think that they can overcome it anyway. And
So I'll stay here, because if anyone can fend off a mortal army, it's her. And you can approach the Big Them and Ia for aid.
It just occurred to me we haven't been apart since this started.
We haven't.
Not really.
No. But if we want to ensure that there is no slippage of time, I think that connection will behoove us both, and I can't see another way to protect the city from the siege while we come up with a plan to be nothing the Shadowed Lands.
Thank you.
Of course.
Apatia chimes in and sort of has her hands sort of on the handles of her daggers behind her back, and she says, I'll stay too and make sure that Lyssa doesn't have to defend the city alone. I don't quite match her for destructive capacity, but she gives another sharp-toothed smile and says, I can be quite intimidating to mortals when I wish it.
Thank you.
She reaches out and up and squeezes your forearm.
I suspect that I would be of most use to accompany you, Dusk.
I nod as though it hadn't occurred to me until that moment that you might not be coming. I might look a little stricken. Well, we'll endeavor to be back very quickly indeed, and with a new force.
If anyone can do it, it's you. You too.
So where around here can we find some perfect darkness?
I probably know that.
Oh, that's directed squarely.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I mean, possibly any number of cellars, very certainly the city's dungeon, which is, I believe, where you came into the city.
Yeah, that's probably. I mean, we know the way. I think we'll go out the way we came in.
Mm-hmm. Apatia gives the two of you a brief but fierce hug, and then sort of wraps, if not her whole body, then certainly more than her arms around Lyssa's formidable bicep as the two of you leave, and you head to the dungeon, nodding affably at the confused guards who make no move to stop you. This is probably something that is occurring to me but may not occur to Dosk, but might occur to Romnet. Are you letting anybody at Lid Manor know that you are not going to be in the city for the foreseeable future?
Yeah, foreseeable is the key word there.
No.
In fact, yes. Let's make this canonically what happens. I make a move to make a detour toward Lid Manor before we head to the dungeons, and then Romnet stops me, I think is what it sounds like happens.
All right. And
I'm sorry, dear, but your family's full of dicks. And they would try to stop us.
I don't think I've ever heard anyone put it so succinctly, and I need you. Thank you for knowing that, and thank you for stopping me from... Let's go.
You head into the dungeon, and as soon as the darkness is complete enough, you find yourselves back in the plaza by the gates. A matter of a couple of steps through absolute darkness. The gate slamming behind you. Romnet, you feel immediate relief from being back. It was as though you had gotten used to carrying a heavy burden and have been allowed to set it down.
I will probably stumble a step.
I'll catch him helpfully but gracelessly.
What do the statues look like?
Ooh, yes.
That was quite literally what my next comment was going to be. The statues, or rather the statue, is currently of Dosk posing like a framer of the Constitution or a signer of the Declaration of Independence with his hand out, laying on something that is not represented in the statue. Romnet behind him, one hand on his shoulder, looking very, very serious, very, very stern. And in the meantime, Lyssa is standing with her back to both of them, wielding Electo in one hand and holding the other one out as though to guard them from attack from behind. Apatia is not represented in this particular statue.
No.
Miss not appearing in this film.
Indeed. She has only rarely appeared, one or two, I think.
Usually
Double-check
as
at
an
some point,
enemy.
I guess. But arriving back, everything in Fermata seems to be more or less as you left it, which is to say not precisely normal, except that after a moment you realize that the people thronging the square are not going about their business. Rather, there seems to be sort of an encampment here. And it only takes a moment or two of observation to see that it is an encampment of perhaps not all, but certainly many of the Lightward have put up tents and lean-tos in this plaza and are sort of congregated together. There doesn't seem to be any particular unrest to this. It's not as though there is a cordon of non-Lightward around or anything like that, but they are clustered together sort of on one side of the plaza.
I think as we know we don't have too much time to lose, but what is time even here? So I think do we recognize any faces among the Lightward and among the encamped Lightward specifically?
Dusk, you probably spot Thad. He's pretty big. Just seems to be moving between one tent and another lean-to.
All right, so I intercept Thad and I ask him. I say, this seems to be a bit of a new development. Hello?
He waves at you. Thad is unchanged, as far as you can tell. Seems to be, at least in visible points, the same as he ever was. And he goes, "Oh, my lord. No, we're just it's gotten real hard here for the Lightward, because darkness, right? And after the Prophet was able to go with you, and he sort of gives a bow to Romnet, he says, we figured maybe we could leave, but we haven't really been able to yet, so we're just kind of like trying to learn our way around the gates and see what we need to do to like get out. We send people, and he addresses this part to Romnet. We send people up to the manifestation to sort of beseech the obsidian god and to make obeisance and sacrifice like every day. Like we're super like pious and stuff. We're not like apostates or anything. But we would kind of like to go if like that's something you could do, but like don't. I mean, I'm sure you're busy.
To the degree that I am able to influence and assist, and I will offer this in a tone of, I have no idea.
Right.
I would certainly be happy to help in that regard. We are heading that way for business.
He bobs his head.
So it may present us an opportunity to make that inquiry.
He bobs his head. He's like, awesome. So like, thanks. And, is, he sort of, stands up a little straighter and goes, is Lady Alyssa back?
Not as yet.
She is not.
Cool. Yeah, well, Kea was sort of looking for her, so I thought I'd ask, but I'll let her know that she's not back yet. It's cool. Thanks. And he gives like a
out of curiosity, how long have we been gone?
I was probably like a couple of days, I guess. I wasn't here when you left, but yeah, like a couple days maybe.
Because for us, it's been like hours?
Most of a day.
Right? Okay, yeah.
About a day, yeah.
What even is time?
He goes, that's deep.
Well, whatever time is, these times are a heavy burden, so know that you don't lift them alone. And we take earlier.
Right on as you depart.
That is some wonderful nonsense, Drew.
And so
this was in character a private joke for Romnet. This look how shitty I would be at your job.
So
I will smile at you as we go.
So you're heading toward the manifestation, I believe.
Yep.
And as you head in that direction, you are finding yourself that you have entered through the riotous city this time, and your progress is only a little slower because of that. People tend to get out of your way even as they are rioting, not literally.
Out of curiosity, is the gate area in both the quiet and the riotous, or are there quiet and riotous gates, or...
The gates themselves seem to be shared between both. The statue seems to be the same in both, but the actual area of the plaza does seem to be mirrored.
Okay. Because that's not confusing.
No, and it would actually help to explain how perhaps you wouldn't have seen the encampment if it is only in the riotous city, which you have not yet ascertained. But as you are heading up to the manifestation through the riotous city, you come to the square in front of the Cyclopean Temple, and it is mostly empty, sparse, I guess would be the word. And sitting kind of on the steps to the manifestation, looking troubled, is someone you wouldn't have expected to see there. Ia spots you as you are coming in, and she sort of doesn't run. She's too dignified for that, but she hurries in your direction.
She covers the ground thoroughly.
Indeed. And addresses Dusk and says, "I am glad you're back. And something seems to be amiss. What did you find?"
Where to begin? It would seem that...
A city and a god and an army.
That's well said. It would seem that Taraxis and Cirtha have acquired a common enemy, extremely bent on total conquest. I hope this isn't entirely new information to you.
She blinks and she says, "The Shadowed Lands move."
Yes.
Palaran is at war.
"Palaran. I see." She shakes her head a little bit and says, "Well, then I suppose that our positions have changed. What do you intend to do?"
We intend to undo the Shadowlands.
She blinks and she says, "Decisive. I like it. How?"
There are a few different plans that we are contemplating, one of which may involve your assistance, your collectively, that is, if you are willing and able.
She nods.
Palaran being the god of shadow, rot, and verdure. I've forgotten out of character the fourth thing.
Wilderness.
Wilderness, thank you. An attack on those concepts may constitute an attack on Palaran, sufficient to, if not neutralize, then certainly to a great extent defang the army outside of Tharet.
She nods some. She says, I see. Well.
And things that do not rot and are not wild and are not green include cities and deserts.
She perks up at the word deserts and she says, have you sought Ventis? And that's where we'll end our session.
Jinkies. Also, I feel like we're just casually talking about nuking the Shadowlands, and that's a bit awkward.
Divine weapons of mass destruction. This whole thing was like, it was like a documentary about like the decision to drop atomic bombs. Like it was all just, you can't fight in here, it's the war room kind of stuff.
And Romnet is just very, okay, I suppose this is what we're doing. Like, how do we actually do this? Like, awkwardly Robert Oppenheimer.
Oh, man.
Awkwardly, Robert Oppenheimer was my wildly unsuccessful drag show.
I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but I am glad there was not a huge audience for that.
Me too, deep down.
Did they kind of blow up in your face?
Oh,
You're just splitting atoms now. Okay. Speaking of atoms, Adam.
you all are fun. All right. Well, that concludes this session of Dice Punks. Thanks for joining us. I hope our players and listeners enjoyed it as much as I did, and that you all join us again next time. Everybody who participated in this session, so everybody, can get 1 mortal XP. So go ahead and mark that down. Listeners at home, if you're hearing us now, then you probably know where to listen to this, but we can be found almost any place one can listen to podcasts, as well as on the wider web at dicepunks.com and on Twitter as @dicepunks. But with that, I think we're ready to say farewell. So say goodbye to the kind folks at home, players.
Thanks for listening as we lose our actual minds in and out of character.
Yes. Thank you for listening, everyone. I am troubled by the actions discussed in today's episode. But sometimes it seems that violence may be the answer.
Thanks for listening, folks. And don't try this.
Bonus points for the Mythbusters reference. And as the poet once said, head down and straight in line, fever dreams of a foreign tribe. Thank you, dear listeners, for tuning in, and stick around through the admin stuff. There's a Romnet prophecy waiting for you at the end of it. The songs in this episode, theme of the Dice Punks in its acoustic version, were written and recorded by the Regal of Nothing himself, Drew. Cover art is by Joanne, who has appeared on the podcast now and again. Check out her work around the internet, where she goes by Anything Sews Embroidery. Site design and graphics for dicepunks.com are by Robin, the player behind Lissa, the irrepressible Duchess of Fury. Rain and the one-roll engine it runs on were created by Greg Stolze, whose work can be found in a lot of places, but I'll point you toward gregstolze.com. Nobilis was created by Jenna Caterin Moran and can be found alongside much of her other really intriguing work, both in and outside of tabletop role-playing games, at afarandsunlessland.wordpress.com. Links to both systems and authors can be found in the Punk Grimoire section of our website, dicepunks.com. Thank you so much for listening. If you liked what you heard, well, that's reward enough on its own, really, but if you're so inclined, you can help us out by rating and reviewing us wherever you listen to us, telling your friends who you think would like us to give us a listen, and even by heading over to Patreon at patreon.com/dicepunks. We have fun rewards available to backers, including a patron-only Discord and access to the Dice Peaks After Show for episodes 1 and following. Regardless, we hope you'll tune in again, and until then, remember, subtlety is for cowards.
When you are alone in the night, and all seems hopeless with the weight of that which you must do, and remember that the obsidian god is there with you, watching.